This ceramic rain cloud that actually rains is one of my favorite things to make, but every time I post it, people comment asking what function does it provide. And when people see my tiny ceramic charms, they say, hey, those would be great for stitch markers. So what if we combined the two ideas and made raindrops that were stitch markers that could be easily stored inside of a cloud? Without further ado, welcome to part 1 of making a rainy day pour set, stitch marker edition. So to start, I needed to make a whole bunch of raindrops. I do this by rolling tiny balls of equally sized clay and then rolling them along the side of my hands to create a raindrop shape. Then I cut a whole bunch of high fire wire and made them into eye pins so that way all of the little raindrops could be charms. Next up was making the cloud. To do this, I grab a whole bunch of clay and then make various sized balls, stack them together into a cloud shape, and then use various tools to smooth said cloud out. Once the piece is nice and smooth, the only thing left to do is wait for it to get leather hard so it can be carved. But because this piece is solid, it does take quite a while to dry, so to make sure that that happens nice and evenly, especially with this weird winter weather, I'm going to go ahead and place it in a Ziploc bag. Instead of closing it all the way, I'm going to loosely seal it so some air can still get in, and I will see you all tomorrow for underglaze and carving, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Today we cut a cloud in half and scoop out all of its guts. Welcome back to part 2 of making a ceramic rainy day pour set stitch marker edition. So to start the day, I checked on the cloud and it was just about leather hard on the outside, which is perfect for hollowing a piece out. I started by cutting it in half and then scooping out the insides. The reason I wait for my piece to be just before leather hard is because if you wait any longer than that, it's really hard to scoop the insides out and get really even walls. So timing is important here. Then I went ahead and slipped and scored it and got it worked on being put back together. Smoothing the two halves together, being careful not to smush it too hard, can be quite time consuming, but if you work patiently and long enough, you can get the two halves looking like they were never apart in the first place. So once I had that, I set it aside. If you're wondering what I did with all of the guts, I made this smaller cloud, a little mobile cloud, and also all of these raindrops. But while I was waiting for it to dry, I went ahead and worked on the raindrops that I made yesterday. So I started with 2 layers of this baby blue underglaze. Now I said only 2 because for my 3rd layer, I'm actually going to be using a medium blue to hopefully give it some variance in color and have it looking a little more like the ocean. Once underglaze was done, it was time to start working on carving the piece. So I went ahead and mapped out where I wanted the eyes and mouth to go before carving out the mouth. This requires extreme caution. The number of times I've accidentally sliced farther than I wanted to, very annoying, but eventually I got a really cute little mouth and I tried putting some pieces in, but it was still too wet on the inside, so I'll see y'all tomorrow. This cloud wanted rain, so yesterday we scooped out its guts and then turned those guts into raindrops. Welcome back to part 3 of making a ceramic rainy day pour set, stitch marker edition. So in very rainy day fashion, it was raining today, which meant that the humidity in my studio was super high. What does this mean? Well, the cloud didn't get nearly as dry as my pieces typically do overnight, so luckily, underglaze can go onto even raw clay, so we just went ahead and started underglazing. Because this is a white piece, I actually leave the little carved line around the eyes blank, so that way the color of the natural clay kind of defines in between the eye of the cloud and the cloud body. This is my first time doing carved eyes on a cloud. For whatever reason, I've always just painted them straight onto the cloud, but with most of my larger pieces, I've realized that I really love the way that the carved eyes look, even though they're quite a bit more work for both carving them and the underglaze. But for the cloud, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it yet. I think it's just because I'm not used to it. I do think it's cute. I just feel like he looks a little bit terrified. So once everyone had their eyes, I remembered I had this underglaze pencil that I haven't tried out yet, so I grabbed my pencil sharpener and attempted to sharpen it. And I say attempted because I kept breaking the underglaze lead over and over again, so I ended up just kind of giving up once the lead was showing and trying it out. It did mark quite light, and I don't know if that's because the clay isn't entirely dry, but I think it'll do its job. but here are what the raindrops are looking like on their little stitch markers. Here is the little cloud in action dumping out a stitch marker, and I also made a to-go version. I know a lot of people like taking their yarn projects with them, so I thought it'd be super cute to have a keychain where you could keep 3 little stitch markers with you. Unfortunately, the pieces aren't dry enough to go in the kiln tonight, so I'll see y'all tomorrow. The clouds have been brought to life, and it's time to cook them. Welcome back to part 4 of making a ceramic rainy day pour set, stitch marker edition. So this morning the pieces were dry enough to go in the kiln, but not completely dry, so I decided to candle them for 3 hours before putting them to temperature. Candling simply means keeping the kiln at 200 degrees for whatever time you set before it goes up to temperature. These 3 hours should allow the pieces to fully dry out, so that way they can be safely kilned. While the kiln was running, I of course went into the studio and was working on more stuff, like a smaller version of the rainy day pour set. This one will have no function besides joy. I then made this new cloud some little tiny raindrops from its guts, and this entire cloud was actually made from the guts of the first cloud. You can probably tell, but I try to waste as little clay as possible. Other things that I've been working on are this refrigerator magnet version of the rainy day set. And I also decided to do an all cloud version of the stitch markers. So here's one of the little cloudy stitch markers, and here is what the little set would look like on the keychain. I love these little mobile versions. I'll see y'all tomorrow for Glaze Day. The cloud and its rain have been cooked, and it's time for Glaze Day. Welcome back to part 5 of making a ceramic rainy day pour set, stitch marker edition. By about noon, I was able to open up the kiln and take the pieces out so I could give them their bath. This is important just to get dust off. Look at this cool lizard I saw. So that way the glaze goes on nice and smooth. So just gave them a nice rinse, got all the water out, and then took them in the studio, set them on a towel to dry. While they were drying, I started working on a stormy version of the little set. I don't have any big versions probably this time, but I will do a couple of the to-go versions of the stormy set for stitch markers as well as just regular ones. I also started working on some tiny clouds for earrings as well as for something special. Then I got Pepto out and started glazing. Now this pink glaze isn't only for the inside of the cloud's mouth. It's actually for all of the pieces all the way around. You see, this is my clear glaze and it's pink, so that way it's easier to tell where you're brushing it on. The pink color will burn off in the kiln, leaving me with a beautiful shiny glossy coat. For my smaller pieces, I can just dip them in the clear glaze like this, but for larger pieces like the cloud, it's quite easy to just brush them on to make sure that I'm getting a nice even coverage. Once everyone was looking like various forms of Kirby and they had some time to dry, I went ahead and loaded them up and took them outside to the kiln. Now we have a whole bunch of charms, so this kiln was going to be a fun one. I went ahead and took the cloud, put it on a little kiln furniture before getting out my kiln cactus. This little guy is just a piece of clay with a bunch of hi-fi wires stuck in, and its only job is to hold my tiny charms. After getting the kiln cactus all loaded up, I put it inside just on the shelf and then got the tiny cloud to-go version put on a rod before closing the kiln up and getting it started going to temperature. Now, if you stayed this long, I have a little surprise for you. All of those clouds, well, I may be making something special. See you tomorrow. Yesterday, we got our cloud all glazed and took it outside to cook for the final time. Welcome back to part 6 of making a rainy day pour set, stitch marker edition. So this morning I was able to open up the kiln and find a set of perfectly glazed pieces. If you know anything about ceramics, you'll know that it is super unpredictable. So to open up a kiln and find everything exactly how you expected it to be is such a joy. So I went ahead and took everybody into the studio to start getting them hooked up to their pieces. Here's how the raindrops sounded at the beginning of the process. And here's how they sound after. Isn't it just so good? I love them. Now, a fun little announcement before I show you all the results. Tomorrow we will officially be starting Cloudy Skies Moncala, so if you want to see that, you know where it'll be. Now, here is how the blue custom mix glaze came out for the raindrops. I'm so happy with it. Then I went ahead and grabbed all of my colored stitch markers and got them all hooked up to the pieces so that way I can show y'all how everything looks. And if you're only interested in the plain version, there will be both early February, don't worry. But here is the stitch marker all by itself, very cute, and here it is in its little group. Here is the to-go version of the stitch marker keychain. I think it is absolutely adorable and it would go so well on a bag. So cute. Then we have the set. That pour sound, still so good.